Dust rose behind his horse as he rode into Dry Creek, a small, sunburned town nestled between two parched hills. The man was known simply as Cole Hart, a quiet cowboy, lean and broad-shouldered, his eyes the color of old whiskey. He had no plans for the day other than to buy grain, rest his horse, and ride back to his lonely ranch before sundown. But fate had other plans, the kind that rewrote a man's life in a heartbeat. The town looked half dead, like the heat itself had drained its spirit. The saloon door creaked in the wind, the blacksmith's hammer echoed faintly, and a couple of stray dogs dozed under a wagon. Cole tied his horse outside the general store and stepped in, his boots echoing on the worn wooden floor. The place smelled of tobacco and dust. Behind the counter stood a woman. Not young, but not old either, somewhere between the years when hope begins to fade and when it learns to live quietly. Her brown hair was tied up, and her dress was plain, faded blue. Her eyes, though, carried something sharp, like they'd seen too much to still believe in miracles. "Afternoon," she said, her voice steady. "What can I get you?" "Couple sacks of grain," Cole replied, tipping his hat. "For the winter." She nodded and turned to fill the order. As she worked, he noticed the way her hands trembled slightly, like someone always ready for bad news. A scar ran along her wrist, faint but old. "You new in town?" she asked. "Just passing through. Ranch up near the canyon." "You from around here?" "Used to be," she said quietly. "Left for a few years. Came back after my husband was killed." Cole said nothing. The West didn't offer comfort for wounds like that. When she turned, he saw her name stitched on a small tag on her apron, Clara Dalton. The name struck something in him, though he couldn't say why. As she lifted the heavy sacks, Cole moved to help, his hands brushing hers. For a second, something passed between them, a spark buried under layers of silence and grief. "Thank you," she murmured, stepping back. He nodded and began to tie the grain onto his horse, but as he did, a shout came from across the street. A rough-looking man stumbled out of the saloon, clutching a pistol and a bottle. His voice slurred, thick with whiskey. "Clara," he bellowed, "you think you can hide from me?" Her face went pale. Cole's hand drifted to the revolver on his hip, slow but steady. "Get inside," he said quietly. "No," she whispered, "he won't stop." The drunk stumbled closer, spitting curses. "You owe me, Clara. You think I don't remember you? You and your dead husband stole from me." Cole stepped between them. "You best turn around, friend." The man sneered, raising his pistol. "Ain't your business, cowboy." But before the drunk could aim, Cole's gun flashed, a single shot, clean and sharp. The bottle shattered, and the man fell to his knees, his hand bleeding, pistol clattering to the dirt. "You'll live," Cole said coldly. "Now get out of town." The man staggered away, cursing under his breath. Silence fell again, broken only by the wind whistling down Main Street. Clara stared at Cole like she couldn't believe what she'd just seen. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I know," he said softly. "But I couldn't just stand by." The sheriff came running moments later, but Clara stepped forward, her voice calm. "He was defending me, Sheriff. You know what Jake was capable of." The lawman nodded. "Then it's settled. You did right, Hart." After the dust settled, Cole helped Clara close up shop. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky gold and crimson. "You got anyone to help you here?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's just me. Been just me for a long time." He looked around the quiet store, the empty shelves, the broken counter, the quiet sadness in her eyes. "Doesn't have to stay that way," he said finally. She studied him for a long moment, then smiled, a small, trembling smile that looked like the first sunrise after a long night. "You planning to make a habit of saving widows, cowboy?" "Just the ones who need it," he said. That night, he stayed in town. They sat together on the porch behind her store, listening to the wind hum through the desert grass. She told him about her husband, about the dreams they'd had of running a ranch together before the war took him. Cole told her about the years he'd spent alone, chasing cattle and ghosts alike. When morning came, the light hit her hair like fire. He realized then that he didn't want to ride away. The grain could wait. The ranch could wait. Somewhere in that small, dying town, Cole Hart found something worth more than the open range, someone who looked at him like he was more than just another drifter. He came for grain, but he left with a reason to stay. A widow who'd lost everything, and a cowboy who finally found what he didn't know he'd been looking for all his life. The morning light stretched across the plains, turning the rooftops of Dry Creek gold. Cole Hart stood by the hitching post outside Clara's store, his hat low against the sun. He had meant to leave. His horse was saddled, his supplies packed, and yet, his boots wouldn't move. Clara came out with a small basket of biscuits, her apron dusted with flour. "You're still here," she said softly, though there was a flicker of hope in her tone. "Guess I am," Cole said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Figure I'll help fix that busted shutter before I go." She smiled faintly. "That shutter's been busted 2 years. Then it's about time someone fixed it." That day stretched into the next, and the next after that. Cole found reasons to stay, repairs to make, supplies to haul, fences to mend. The truth was simpler. He hadn't felt peace in years, not since the war, not since his brother died on the trail, not since he'd started drifting from one empty town to another. But something about Clara, her quiet strength, her steady eyes, settled the restlessness that had lived in him too long. Dry Creek was small, but it had a pulse again. The folks who'd once passed Clara's store with pity began stopping by again. They noticed the cowboy helping her carry grain, painting her sign, even sharing coffee on the porch when the work was done. Word spread fast in small towns, how the widow and the drifter were keeping company. One afternoon, as they unloaded a wagon of supplies, Clara wiped her brow and looked at him. "You don't owe me anything, Cole," she said. "You've done more than enough." He met her gaze. "Ain't about owing. Maybe I just like being here." "Why?" she asked softly. "What's here for a man like you?" He hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe something I didn't know I was looking for." The wind carried her laughter, light, shy, but real. It was the first time he'd heard it. Weeks turned to months. Cole built new shelves for the store, repaired the roof before the rains, and taught Clara how to ride again. She hadn't been on a horse since her husband died, but with Cole beside her, she learned to trust herself again. The first time she galloped down the dirt road, her hair streaming behind her, he thought she looked like the freest soul he'd ever seen. That night, they sat under the stars outside town, a small fire flickering between them. The coyotes howled in the distance, but Cole's mind was quiet. "You ever think about leaving again?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "No, not anymore." She looked into the flames, her voice barely above a whisper. "I used to pray for someone to help me keep the store alive. I never thought God would send me someone to keep me alive too." He didn't answer with words. He reached across the fire, his rough hand finding hers, and she didn't pull away. The next morning, Clara opened her store to find a folded paper by the counter, a deed, signed and sealed. Cole had bought the empty barn behind her shop, the one that had been falling apart since her husband's time. "What is this?" she asked when she found him out back, hammering nails into new boards. "Thought I'd stay a while," he said. "Didn't seem right, sleepin' in the stable like some drifter." She stared at him, then the barn, then back. "You're building a home. Guess you could call it that," he said, smiling. From that day, their lives began to braid together. They worked side by side, Clara managing the store, Cole trading grain and tools with the ranchers who came through town. On Sundays, they rode out to the ridge above the valley. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they just sat in silence. For Cole, silence had always been heavy, now it felt like peace. But peace never lasted long in the West. One hot afternoon, a rider appeared at the edge of town, a man dressed in black, dust covering his coat. His face was hard, his jaw scarred. He walked into the saloon asking for Cole Hart. The name alone sent a hush through the room. By the time word reached the store, Clara's hands had gone cold. Cole found her staring through the window. "You know him?" she asked. "Yeah," Cole said grimly. "Name's Jed Carson. Used to ride with me. We worked for a rancher near Abilene till things went bad. He blames me for what happened." "What happened?" Cole looked away. "Rancher's payroll got stolen. Jed wanted to go after the money, I wanted no part of it. Men died that night. He's been huntin' me since." Clara's breath hitched. He'll come here, I know. That evening, as the sun bled red behind the hills, Cole saddled his horse. Clara stood at the door, trembling. Don't go, she said. Not like this. He stepped closer, his voice low. If I don't, he'll bring it to your door. I can't have that. Then let me come with you. He smiled softly. You don't belong in the kind of fight he's bringing. Tears welled in her eyes. You can't keep losing people, Cole. Not again. He touched her cheek, rough thumb brushing away a tear. I ain't planning to. He rode out toward the edge of town where the desert stretched wide and empty. The moon hung low, and the air smelled of gunpowder and rain. Jed was waiting, his horse pawing the ground, eyes cold and hungry. Didn't think I'd find you playing shopkeeper, Jed sneered. Cole dismounted, his boots crunching in the dirt. You found me. Now what? You left me for dead, Jed spat. I lost everything because of you. You lost it because of greed, Cole said evenly. And I'm done running from your ghosts. The two men stared at each other, hands twitching near their holsters. Then, in a flash, steel gleamed under moonlight. Two shots cracked the night air. One echoed longer than the other. When the smoke cleared, Jed lay still in the dust, his gun beside him. Cole's side burned hot where the bullet had grazed him, but he stayed on his feet. He holstered his pistol and looked toward town. By the time he got back, Clara was waiting by the well, lantern in hand, tears streaking her face. When she saw the blood, she ran to him. You're hurt, she gasped. Not bad, he said, voice shaking. It's done. He won't be back. She pressed a hand to his wound, trembling. You could have died. He smiled faintly. Would have been a shame. I was just starting to like this town. She let out a shaky laugh, then leaned into him, her forehead against his chest. For the first time since his brother's death, Cole felt something deep, like roots finally finding soil. Days passed. Cole healed. Life in Dry Creek began to settle again, though everyone spoke quietly of the night the drifter and the outlaw met under the moon. Clara's store grew busier. People from nearby towns came by, drawn by the kindness of the widow and the calm strength of the cowboy beside her. One crisp morning, a wagon rolled into town carrying a preacher and his wife. They stopped at the store, smiling kindly. Clara sold them supplies, and as they left, the preacher turned to Cole. Fine woman you've got there, son, he said. You two married. Cole opened his mouth, then closed it. Clara looked up from the counter, a faint color rising in her cheeks. Not yet, Cole said finally. But I reckon it's about time. That evening, when the sky turned violet, he found Clara on the porch. She was sewing a torn curtain, the light catching her hair. Clara, he said quietly, removing his hat. You ever think about starting over? For real this time? She looked up, heart pounding. What do you mean? He knelt beside her chair, eyes steady and warm. I've been riding too long. Chasing ghosts, lossin' folks I cared for. But with you, I feel like I found home. I don't got much to offer. Just my hands, my word, and whatever years I got left. But they're yours, if you'll have them. Her hands trembled, tears glinting in the corner of her eyes. Cole Hart, she whispered, you already gave me everything I didn't know I needed. He smiled then, slow and genuine, the kind that melted years of sorrow. He took her hand, kissed her knuckles, and for a long while, neither spoke. A month later, Dry Creek came alive like it hadn't in years. The little church on the hill filled with neighbors, ranchers, and travelers. The preacher from the passing wagon returned to perform the ceremony. Clara wore a simple white dress she'd sewn herself, and Cole stood in a clean black suit, looking like a man reborn. When she walked down the aisle, the world fell quiet. Afterward, they danced in the open air, the stars bright and bold above them. Someone played a fiddle, kids laughed, and for the first time in a long while, Dry Creek felt like home to everyone again. The months that followed were golden. The store thrived, and Cole expanded the barn into a workshop where he fixed wagons and built furniture. He and Clara planted a garden behind the store, where sunflowers grew taller than fences. Every morning, they worked side by side. Every night, they watched the sun sink behind the hills. But the west was wild, and peace was never promised. One summer, drought struck. The riverbed near town dried to dust, and ranchers began to leave. Clara worried for the townsfolk, how they'd buy food, how the children would get by. Cole rode for miles, gathering supplies, helping where he could. One evening, he returned weary and covered in dust. Clara met him on the porch. "You can't save everyone," she said softly. "Maybe not," he replied, "but I can damn sure try." They gave grain from their own stock, fed families who couldn't afford it. People whispered that the widow and the cowboy had hearts big enough for the whole desert. When rain finally came months later, it came in floods. The dry creek bed roared again, washing away the drought, the dust, and the fear. Cole stood in the doorway, holding Clara close as thunder rolled across the sky. Years passed. The scars of the West faded, though never completely. The store grew, the town grew, and so did the legend of the cowboy who came for grain and stayed for love. Travelers passing through often asked about him, about the man with the quiet voice and the strong hands who never raised his gun again after that night. Clara would smile, brushing dust from a shelf, and say, "He's out back, fixing something like always." They grew older together, weathered and wise. And though time took its toll, it never took the spark between them. On their 20th anniversary, Clara found Cole sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a horse. The sunset painted the land gold, the same way it had the day he'd first ridden into Dry Creek. "You remember that day?" she asked, sitting beside him. He nodded, smiling faintly. "Rode in for grain, rode out with you," she laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You never did get that grain." "Didn't need it," he said. "Found something better." The wind carried the scent of sage and rain. In the distance, the sound of church bells echoed faintly. Dry Creek wasn't the same dusty town anymore. It was alive, full of stories and laughter. And at its heart stood the store that had once been run by a lonely widow and a wandering cowboy. Now it was a home. Cole watched the horizon, his hand resting over hers. The sun slipped low, and he felt peace settle deep in his bones, peace he'd never thought he'd earn. He'd come for grain, but left with a life. And the woman who'd changed it forever.